Thank you everyone for joining us today. This is our third webinar as the part of the Massachusetts LGBTQ+ Job Week. Today we're focusing on presenting yourself authentically at work and all that entails. My name is Carly. I use she, her pronouns. It's been so great working with everyone throughout Job Week. We have more programming coming up that you can catch up on our social media channels, and I'll be sending out content to everyone who's joining on this webinar as well as others via email. If you want to participate in the Q&A portion of this webinar, you can do so by going to the little icon that has two chat bubbles and says Q&A under it. You can click on that and submit a question either with your name attached or anonymously at any time throughout, and then we'll round back to all the questions at the end. If we don't get to any, I'll also be following up via email with answers from the panelists. So with that, I'm not going to take up any more time. I'm going to turn it over to Tori and these wonderful, wonderful speakers. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Carly, and hi, everybody. So as Carly started talking about, we're here today to talk with some really amazing panelists about what it looks like to survive and ideally thrive in the workplace. You know, of course, in an ideal world, our workplaces would be identity affirming. They'd have all kinds of protections that are always on continuous improvement. Employees would abide by them, respect them, you know, support them. And also the reality is that we live in a world where there are massive amounts of bias. And even if that's not true in your workplace, there's a ton of microaggressions that we are experiencing as a community on a daily basis. So the goal of this panel is to hear from our panelists on how job seekers and employees can address and enter and prepare to enter workplaces in a way that affirms their identities, to learn to advocate for themselves from the stories that we're going to hear today, to challenge situations that come up, and to seek out mentorship and communities, and when communities don't exist, how to build those communities. So I'm really excited to introduce you to our panelists today. And just to start, we're going to talk a little bit about where people are in their career journey, how they got there, and what they do today. So I'll just share really briefly. My name's Tori Kaufmann-Paulman. The pronouns that I use are they, them, and also she, her in the business world right now. I'm in the 24th year of my career. I currently hold the position of Director of IT Client Services at Pega, which is a Boston headquartered but globally situated software company. And I'm also on the board of directors of Pride in Our Workplace, which I know has a tremendous partnership with the Chamber. So to get us started though, I'm gonna pivot over to Kellie Tiller. Will you share us a little bit about where you are in your journey and what this means to you?
Yeah, thank you so much, Tori. I appreciate that. Hello, everybody. My name is Kellie Tiller. The pronouns are she, her, hers. Currently, I am a trial attorney for the Committee for Public Counsel Services. So if you don't know exactly what that is, because it's such a long title, it is a public defender. So I'm going into my third year in September. And as you all know, as we are all experiencing, it has been quite an interesting 2020. So with that, and with this time being able to be off, what I've been doing is also developing my own place where I can affirm myself. And not to say that the Committee for Public Counsel Services has not, they are very, very much so LGBTQIA plus friendly. It is very open there, and I'm comfortable. I can say, you know, in a way, I feel like it's a space that allows me to be my authentic self. And I personally know that I would not be in any place in which I cannot be myself. So again, there's where that kind of segues into a pathway where I'm trying to create a lane for myself and other masculine of center presenting folks to be able to be comfortable in their masculinity and still be able to be authentically them. In the way in which the world may or may not receive us. But that's the way that we learn and discover how to do that. So that's what I've been doing for the past couple of years and now months with the intersection.
I love that. That is non-negotiable. I love how you put that. So now we're going to pivot to Cairo. Cairo, can you share a little bit about where you are in your journey and what this means to you?
Sure, thank you, Tori. So I just want to point out that I'm early in my career journey. I've been at the Boston Foundation for the last 2.5 years. For those of you who don't know the Boston Foundation, we're a 100-year-old institution, the largest community foundation in the country. And we have 5 key strategic areas that we've really honed down on, which is health and wellness, housing and neighborhoods, jobs and economic development, arts and culture, and education to career. And we also have 2 cross-cutting strategies, which is nonprofit effectiveness and the grassroots strategy. And I'm a member of the grassroots strategy. But prior to coming to the foundation, I was an immigrant rights organizer. So my love for social justice, for activism, organizing, it didn't really begin at the foundation or in philanthropy. It really began at the community level. And I think when I think about my sort of the way I show up at work, or the way I present myself at work, I carry my lived experiences as someone who grew up undocumented here as an immigrant, and my queerness, right? I don't think, that they're connected in many ways, and so whenever I walk into spaces, I'm carrying both of these identities with me, and being in the sector where oftentimes we have folks who aren't as connected to the work, right? Making decisions on behalf of people who are connected, right? Or making decisions that will impact people who are directly connected. It's so crucial that those of us who are queer, who are trans, who are people of color, are able to come into these rooms and to push these institutions to do better, and to direct resources to communities that have historically been marginalized. And so for me, connecting with other people of color, other queer and trans folks at work, has, really a white dominant institution that is over 100 years old, has added incredible benefit to my own personal journey, but also like my ability to be able to thrive in the workplace. So I'm really grateful to be here with everyone and to be able to share a little bit of insight on my own journey.
I love that. And thank you so much for even bringing out the idea that even within our community, we don't always have the people at the table who need to voice what's really needed, even from within our own community. So that's tremendous. Thanks for being here with us today. Karon. Karon and I serve on a board together, and Karon serves on 1 million boards. She's phenomenal. So will you tell us a little bit about where you are in your journey, and maybe even the path of your journey, and what this topic means to you?
Sure. Thank you, Tori, and welcome everybody. I'm pleased to be here today. I use she, her, hers pronouns, and I would describe myself at this particular moment on the beginning of my next phase of my career journey after several decades as a part of the workforce at Harvard Pilgrim Healthcare. And the work that I do now is under the brand of Karon Young Consulting, and I focus on how diversity, equity, and inclusion play a pivotal role in individual and organizational success. So how to mobilize that within each of ourselves and our organizations. A key moment when my identity became very much a part of my career happened both in participating or joining Harvard Pilgrim, because I was actually seeking refuge to find a safe place to work as a person who was coming out in the midst of a divorce and where there wasn't legal protection related to the custody of my children. And I needed to be able to provide for them, obviously, and continue forward in a way that mobilized my own sense of contribution. So it was a bit of a trauma, and found a really safe place at Harvard Pilgrim. And I think that I became comfortable in some ways in a safe place, in a safe context, that got radically disrupted when the pivot between focusing on learning and development, organizational development, and change shifted in its priority to leading the diversity, equity, and inclusion enterprise-wide initiative at Harvard Pilgrim, and where I would need to be and could be much more public about who I am and what I bring to the table and how to advocate for myself and others. And that wasn't an easy shift given some of the trauma that I decided to revisit and to reclaim.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing both of those journeys too. So Mason, share with us kind of where we're at. I saw Mason moderate a Pride in Our Workplace panel a few months, gosh, it was probably a long time ago, right?
I mean, what is time at this point, really?
We were like
Right.
in proximity to one another, so
Yeah.
I don't know when that was. So yeah, share with us your journey.
Yeah, so my name is Mason. I use he, him, or they, them, theirs pronouns. I am currently serving as the interim state and local policy manager for GLSEN National. And I would say my current place in my career journey is a little bit in flux. I'm in this interim position for the next month and a half about. And in the past, I have been a trans rights advocate, an activist for over 15 years now. I am a lawyer by training. I would say my really like full-time professionally queer, professionally trans advocate position and career started when I was hired as the executive director at the Massachusetts Transgender Political Coalition. And then was, as a part of that work, also co-chair of the Yes on Free campaign in 2018. From there, I moved to Keshet, which is an organization working for LGBTQ equality and Jewish life, and now here at GLSEN. You know, I'm at this moment where I'm kind of asking myself, if I'm ready to step out of being professionally queer. And there's this element of being a queer professional and being professionally queer. And I'm kind of in both of those places and asking myself, well, am I ready to see what else is out there for me? I was writing notes to myself earlier this morning, and what I wrote is that being a trans advocate has always been a cornerstone of my career. But I'm ready to see the rest of the building beyond that cornerstone, I think. So I'm in flux, and that's a really difficult and scary, terrifying, anxiety-producing moment, but it's also full of such opportunity in many ways that I'm excited to see where that goes.
That's wonderful. And it's funny because, you know, sort of Karon just talked about that a little bit, right? Like the navigating when it's funny, I throw around the idea of pro-gay, typically when someone makes a really good guacamole, things like that, but you are in fact a pro-gay. And I love this idea. So actually we had planned to kind of open with that topic. So I wonder if you would share with us a little bit more. You've been through a number of career changes. So when you're looking at a new organization, how do you go about assessing, you know, the prospective organization? Like, do you feel comfortable asking about trans health policies? Will you share a little bit about that with us?
Yeah, and for sure, that's also a journey, because I think where I am now in asking those questions as somebody who has a pretty solid resume as a trans rights advocate, and who is, you know, I've been advocating for these things for so many years, it puts me in a place where I feel a little bit more comfortable phrasing that. And I talk to so many advocates who struggle with this as well. When we advocate professionally, and sometimes it's hard for us to advocate for ourselves. Mm-hmm. It's hard to be in that space to say, you know, I push everybody, you should have trans inclusive healthcare policies in your workplace. You should be able to use, you know, affirming pronouns in the workplace. And then when I say, I want somebody to respect my pronouns, it's like, well, but do I need that? Yes, I do, and I deserve that. And so I think getting over that initial hurdle of saying, I deserve these things just as much as I advocate for these things for others. I think for me, one of the aspects, and I've had a lot of conversations about this, you know, I do my research about organizations and mm-hmm. folks that I am applying for jobs at. Do you have a non-discrimination policy? But more than do you have a non-discrimination policy, do you have the protocols, do you have the follow-up necessary to implement those policies? Who do I talk to? What is the process? What does that look like if I experience discrimination in the workplace? When I am filling out your application, is there a space for me to say that my legal name is this, but my affirming name is this, and I want that respected? It starts from day one when I'm looking at your organization or your application, for me to say, I have questions about so many things. And there are certainly aspects where I say, this organization has no statement about its dedication to racial justice, to LGBTQ rights, to addressing sexism and racism and ableism. If there's nothing there,
Yeah.
it draws a lot of questions. That's going to come up in my interview, because when I'm interviewing for a job, I'm interviewing a company or organization just as much as they're interviewing me. And so
Yeah.
I have to see that. The last thing that I'll say is that statements are a thing where, people put out press releases, they put out statements on social media. I want to see action behind those statements. I want to see that, yes, we are saying Black Lives Matter, and you better be able to say Black Lives Matter on your social media, on your website. And not only that, but I want to see pictures of, staff at the protests, that you're supporting staff going to protests, or that you are highlighting and raising up Black leadership in your organization. And what are you doing to do that? So I love a statement, but more than that, I got to have that action behind it.
Yeah, and to see the action unfold from the beginning, the progress. Sometimes it might be one step. That's phenomenal. And Cairo, we wanted to pivot to you as someone who is earlier in your career, who, I think Mason shared, I've got the resume to back me up. I've got, and particularly, jobs where it's identified that you would have that knowledge and experience. So what was it like for you? Again, you're interviewing that company. You don't want to get into something that it doesn't feel aligned. So how did you navigate that coming out of school and into the workforce?
Yeah, and I think it's important for me to acknowledge that my sort of situation during school is a little bit unique, right? So while I was in school, I was also very active in organizing and activism. So there was, for literally like the 6 years of college that I went through, I was organizing for 7 years. So, it was only a year, like my last year of high school and then into undergrad. And so, that sort of opportunity allowed me to build relationships with people across the region, doing incredible work, not only on the immigration front, but on various fronts of social justice. And I think just having that foundation, having those relationships in place, and that network really benefited me when I graduated college, right? And so whenever I'm talking to folks who are about to enter college, right? Or because I do have the opportunity to mentor immigrant youth or and other young people, I always say, like, don't just stay in the university bubble, like get out, volunteer, get involved in local organizations in your community, and really build relationships with people. Because and I mean that in a non-opportunistic way, right? I'm saying, like, build authentic relationships with people, because the rest will come. And so when I transitioned out of higher ed, similarly to Mason, it was about, like, what fits my values, like what is your organization doing to uphold its own values, and does it align with mine, right? And so when I came to the foundation, one of the key things that motivated me into jumping on was the person that I was going to be working with, who was an incredible woman of color, and who just, like, was so affirming and so kind, and was very transparent with me about, like, where the foundation was at. But then also, after meeting with the program leadership, understanding the commitment to racial equity and the commitment to inclusivity, and sort of being, but then again, that transparency, right? So I think, to me, it's like, are you being honest and transparent about where you're at in this journey? Are you, do our values align with each other? And will I have the opportunity to lead here at some point, right? Like, I think that was really important to me. And so, and again, like it was a lot of it was relationships that sort of pointed me in that direction to the foundation. But I also did the typical sort of undergraduate research, right? Which is like the job boards in school, the Facebook groups, the LinkedIns, the Idealists, and Indeed were all tools that I used to get that. And you know, I think one thing that I often find that, particularly I think in communities of color, we struggle to understand our worth when we go into these places, right? And I think a key lesson for me was that I did not negotiate when I got into this position. And so in many ways, I'm still feeling the impact of that, but it was sort of like, you know, I was fresh out of college. You know, I even though I had this breadth of experience in organizing and connections, I still didn't fully acknowledge my own leadership and acknowledge my own sort of my own addition to the team and to the foundation. And so I didn't negotiate. And that was a valuable lesson to me. I think if I were to go back in time today, I would definitely put those demands and be like, you know, this is what I'm worth, and you have to meet me where I'm at. So still learning and still growing in many ways.
I love that you raised that, because I think it also mirrors a little bit of what Mason said, which is, you know, Mason's willing to fight, and I'm paraphrasing, but fight for other people's needs and what is right for them. And then when it came time to, you know, asserting your needs, you were like, well, is it really that important, right? Like, so this idea that all this work that you're doing is also for you. And that you are, when you're negotiating the needs that you have as an LGBTQ person of color, all of your intersections, that doesn't then take anything away from your professional experience and what you deserve. So that's phenomenal. Thank you. So we're going to talk about a little bit, like sort of continue down this journey of talking about what it's like when you enter. Right? So now you've made the decision, you've made an assessment, and you think matches your values, you think you can thrive there. And Karon, I wonder if you would give us some insight on, you said something at the beginning about kind of entering the corporate workforce at a point in which you were exploring your identity or asserting your identity. And if you could share with us what that's been like as you've navigated through your career, feeling safe to be your authentic self.
So in some ways, it's a continuation of what Cairo and Mason have just said, that it's a struggle to understand our worth when we have been impacted or experience the marginalized parts of ourselves so intensely. I remember as one of my assignments early on, I was assigned to a business unit and consulting with a leader, and the leader was talking about an organizational change that he at the time was planning to make. And I remember struggling with the idea that I needed to come out before I could offer what the consulting was. And it was as though I needed to offer a disclaimer about who I was. And I'm sure in so many ways, the internalized oppression that we feel and the marginalization that we allow ourselves to feel plays itself out in such a diminishing way for ourselves and other people. So I certainly noticed myself navigating, I think it's the why question of why do I come out and when and for what reason. I feel like I learned a lot from people living and working with disabilities around disclosure in that regard as well. So when is it necessary for empowerment? When is it necessary for accommodation? When is it necessary for me to just affirm who I am? And as has been said so beautifully here, to understand that I bring a great deal of value and it comes from my strengths or my skill set, not diminished by the way in which my identities are impacting me. I'll fast forward to say that I think for any any people who are entering the job market after, this is also a marker. People say, don't say 45, 50, 55, 60, 65. There's a whole nother layer of internalized depression that is very much the external message to you about organizations who may or may not understand the reality that we keep becoming better and more of ourselves if we're paying attention to who we are, and we have so much to value. So in some ways, I would say over time, it's for me become an exploration of two relationships. One is with myself, and where am I about understanding my value and the way in which the pivot of my identities can play themselves out powerfully when I am privileged and when I am not, and how to use those meaningfully. And the other is with the relationship with the context itself. I was listening to a podcast, and Tracy Ellis Ross was talking about decontextualizing. And I think that there's something about having the ability to assess a situation and the context that you're in to make very many decisions about how and when it is necessary to be whole, and how much of that wholeness to express.
I love that. And I was hoping we could pull in, I love that. I wrote it down too. This idea is one is for myself, and one is that relationship with context, and so much power in not having it to be a reveal. Like you have to reveal for any reason or not.
Right.
I love that idea of it being a place of empowerment. And I think that will take some of the weight off the experience. So Kellie, I speak to you as someone who's also mask presenting, in the sense that there are just some things that are obvious to people first interaction, right? So could you share with us, your overall perspective on this? Like, what does it look like? I loved how you said it's non-negotiable. So what does it look like? What does non-negotiable look like in the workforce, tempered by you're not hiding some things?
Right. Well, like, I guess for myself, I'd have to say I can't hide anything, right? So I walk in, you see my black skin, that's where it is. Okay. You see my masculine of center presenting self. Okay. So automatically I already know that people's mind goes, well, she might, or do I call her a she, or I don't, the questions that go around. So I just go ahead and just break the ice right then. Yes, I am queer Black woman. So I've already addressed all the questions right there. All right. So then from there, I just I have to be myself. The same way that you see me right here on this panel is the same way that I would be if I were at a party, if I were, at any function where we're doing a fundraiser, the same person. The way that I just automatically address the elephant in the room, if there is an elephant, right? The way that I am, that's how you must address me. And if there is one part of me that you don't like the whole me. And so I don't particularly like to spend my time. And when I say time, I mean, that's my most valuable asset. So if I feel like I am being tolerated rather than celebrated, it's time to go. I don't have the luxury to sit here and coddle or cater to your own inconsistencies. I can do that for myself. I can do bad by myself, but I'm not. You see what I'm saying? So that's what it means for me to be non-negotiable. I've had to live in this skin all my life. So there's already that. So I'm used to that. It's sad, but it is true. Okay. So then I'm dealing with the fact, okay, I'm a whole queer presenting person. Like, that's fine too. Address me and I can then have a conversation with you. But if it ever gets to the point where, like I said, I feel like I'm being tolerated rather than celebrated, then we have to come back to the drawing board, and then I need to reassess where my time needs to be.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're
And
not deserving of it, gotta go.
yeah, and you said something at the beginning. I'm so glad that other people are here to hear that, because it's so affirming, right?
Right.
If you're tolerating me instead of celebrating me, I don't have time for you. That's such a powerful statement. When you said that the public defender's office is, the longer name is harder, is really affirming and welcoming, right? Has there been moments where you have had to educate or help them evolve? And what does that look like for you?
Absolutely. Like, as we're in the current state of the world, where the Black Lives Matter movement is taking over, and rightfully so, there are things that some folks either are unaware and oblivious to privilege, specifically their white privilege, and they literally have no idea what it requires to be in this skin, in this world right now as it exists. And so there are teachable moments that take place. For instance, it's kind of crazy. A supervisor of mine, reached out and wanted resources about how, she and her family can be anti-racist. And, my initial response to that was, okay, am I the only person that you actually know to feel comfortable enough to ask this? Because the relationship there as supervisor, supervisee is a little different.
Yeah.
But what she further went to explain is that she's asked some other friends of hers who are of color, and they've given resources, and she's done some research herself. So she kind of wanted to fact check. And I don't know if that was to, say that I'm not the only one or what it was. Either way, I was like, this is not about me. This is what will be to help our clients. This will be what will be there to help other attorneys of color, and them, being able to have meaningful interactions. So being able to explain that, it was something that I was willing to do. Sometimes going into courtrooms where I'm the only masculine center queer attorney in the county, there's barriers there. So addressing judges, addressing, opposing counsel, addressing court officers, clerks, folks who are looking at you like, do you deserve to be here? And I look at them back like, absolutely. Please tell me that I don't, so that I can educate you more. So it has its own things, but within CPCS itself, there are, higher positions, executives who are very versed in LGBTQIA, and also are folks of color. And those who do not identify within the group of the LGBTQIA community, they are more adept to listening and actually hearing what it is that folks are saying. So feeling seen, capital S, and heard within your corporation, it just kind of helps you to be able to navigate things, so you know who you need to speak to regarding, small situations that happen. So I know who I need to go to feel supported. And if I need to educate, then I know who I need to go to address that as well. So it has its ebbs and flows.
Yeah, and I love what you wove the story around. Yes, you can educate people. You have the knowledge and the lived experience, but it's not your responsibility alone. And what I really loved that you shared there is that you did, but you also pushed back and reminded people that they can educate themselves and that it's not your role. You know, a little bit off script, Mason, I saw you like emphatically nodding your head. Would you want to just jump in and maybe even share a little bit of a reaction to that before we kind of move on?
Yeah, this is an area that you know, as somebody, I've done a lot of training and education about trans inclusivity in the workplace, and one of the first things I say when I'm in those situations, talking to managers, supervisors of any organization, corporation, business, whatever it may be, is listen, I am here as a professional educator for, you know, trans identities and rights in the workplace. That's my job. It is not your trans employees' jobs to educate you. It is not their place. It is not their, you know, they may be open to questions, but it is not your place. That's a better way to put this. It is not your place as a supervisor, manager, what have you, to go to your trans employees and say, educate me. You need to, you know, bring in this. There's so many organizations and individuals doing this work that bringing in and paying those people for their time and experience and expertise is so important, rather than just going to, quite frankly, I will use the term, it's kind of lazy to go to the nearest queer, trans person or person of color and say, please educate me. When there are better resources, there are more opportunities to learn. And so that is like one of those things, because it's also, there's a power dynamic there, right? Yeah. Of like, if you're talking to somebody that you supervise, you're saying it's your job to educate me because I'm your supervisor and I have that power to demand that of you. And that puts that staff, employee, whoever it is, in a really awkward position to say no.
Right. Or even edit like what they really want or need because of the power dynamic.
So many times I've heard from trans folks who say, you know, I wanted to be able to say, please get my pronouns right, because you mess them up every time. You know, that's like barrier number one of like, let's be trans inclusive here. But being able to have that power in that situation and be critical of a supervisor, really difficult and really uncomfortable, and it shouldn't really happen like that.
Well, and so we're going to pivot to Cairo, but one thing that you said, you know, on this topic of educating is, and I really want to just underline this, is advocating for bringing people in who are experts in this field and paying for them for their time and their work. And that it could be a really great skill to walk away from this with. If you are someone who is being asked to educate, maybe you've got in your pocket the business card of that person who like, yeah, let's do that. Here, call this person, right? And kind of feeling empowered to do that. So that's fantastic. So Cairo, we wanted to come back to you and talk about when you entered the workplace. What did it look like to try to find like-minded? Now you said you looked for an organization that matched your values. So you're in, you know, 3 people from the interview process. How did you build that community?
Yeah, that's a really great question. Sorry, I'm still just like reflecting on like Kellie's and
share, yeah.
Because I'm just like, you know, it's the whole specifically the point around power dynamics is just so real in the sector that I'm working in, right? Like, how do you deal with donors who are, you know, grew up at a time when certain terms or movements had not, evolved or existed. How do you deal with situations that are inappropriate, or that you felt targeted, or that I think that is something that people of color, that queer trans people and people of color have experienced at the workplace. And I think I'm still just mind blown. So thanks for elevating that, y'all. So I think for me, sort of finding community is a journey that I'm still figuring it out as well. So, you know, I work at an organization that, yes, is upholding these values, but is still really behind in many ways as well, right? Like, we're 100 years old, we move really slow. And I'm very lucky to work at a department that is very progressive, you know, I work at programs, so the program department. And that has allowed for really deep and incredible conversations around a variety of issues. And we've you know, we've messed up along the way, right? And maybe have leaned a lot on our staff to present. I've certainly have had to present on a few things that sort of brought out my inner trauma, but we've also brought folks from the outside, and so it's been a sort of you know, you're learning as you're going kind of thing. You know, I'm a firm believer that if these spaces don't exist, then you gotta go create it. And so, you know, for me, it was really important to be around people of different lived experiences, but also people of color. And so it took from, like, you know, the little one-on-ones that you have in the hallway to the having lunch with people. It's almost like you're the, you know, first day at work, first day at school kind of kid. And having to sort of navigate that, but also, you know, like we just 7 months ago, actually, a lot of us were like, you know, we need a space that is for associates of color, and we just have to do it. And even if we have to figure out with HR later, then we will. But I think we just need to meet, to strategize, to you know, vent, to really think through about, like, how do we move up in this institution? How do we push? How do we get resources to the communities that you know, have been historically marginalized? So because we do acknowledge that we sit in these seats of power and privilege, and you know, how do we leverage that platform, right? And so if it's not there, you know, get together with a group of people and really build it. And it's not easy. I certainly am not saying that, but I do think that if it had not been for the people that I met at TBF who were, you know, shared similar experiences as I did, or even different experiences, but shared my values and my politics, I don't know where I would be.
Yeah.
So it has been a tremendous lesson for me.
That's awesome. And I love that you also said you wanted to connect with people of different backgrounds. So, you know, not draw in just to the shared backgrounds, but also, you know, sort of diversify across that. Now, it's funny that you said run into the hallway or chat, you know, all of these things that we used to do in the workplace. And so we've got some really great questions coming in, so I want to get to some of those, but Karon has taught me so much about Zoom, and Michael O'Neill from the Chamber. And I wonder, Karon, if we could get your thoughts on what the impact, and any panelist that wants to jump in too, what the impact of going digital has been to communities that are underrepresented. Do you want to jump in there and just share some thoughts? Like, I know you even have a digital background also.
Mm-hmm. So I think this is both a serious and also a creative opportunity, that being safe, but also growing in the midst of this environment is something that we have access to and need to pay attention to each other about. So I know as somebody who loves photography and digital landscape and video connections, this is for me an opportunity that means I can connect more easily and quickly I think for some organizations that I'm part of, it means that they've been able to scale their work immeasurably because they rely on people that travel long distances to go and do their work. And now they're being able to incorporate more people into some of the education and experience. So I do think there's that. It's also, I think, draining and difficult. I was relieved to lower my self-view on occasion, just to have so many people looking at you all at the same time, and wondering what they're thinking and how they're viewing. And the reality is all those assumptions, projections, external environments are just like right there in your face, possibly. So I think finding relief and learning how to use this and make it our own is something that's fun. So that's what my background represents. And I know, back to you, Tori, on and Mason, in this case, signaling your tribute to pride. We get opportunities to potentially be more of ourselves.
Yeah, and actually you said that when we got on, and initially as the panelists, I saw Mason's pride flag and I had to go get something that's my daughter's, because I thought, oh, I want to signal that too, right? So I love that idea of continuously making the people around you feel more comfortable in expressing truly who they are. I wonder if any of the panelists would jump in and just share, what does it feel like? I mean, I think often LGBTQ people, people of color, Black people in our workforces feel isolated in the office. And now you've got people who are starting jobs in virtual. You've got people who are, continuing, maybe they were early in their jobs, and how are we, building these communities that allow us to stay connected and feel like we're able to thrive?
That's a great question, Tori. With the digital space, there's so many opportunities that can take place. Just as you mentioned, people getting hired virtually, but it also makes some pretty large assumptions. One of the assumptions being that someone has internet access, or has the ability to be able to actually use and operate programs like Zoom or WebEx or anything of that nature. So I think that what this time has given is a lot of opportunity for people to really kind of come off. I'm Southern, let me go ahead and say it like this. Come off your high hog, okay? And realize that, everybody's levels are different, and you have to be a bit more patient with yourself, patient with other people. Because just as you said, Karon, there is a lot of attention directed when you are on a Zoom all day long. I personally watch my fiance go through different meetings back to back to back with very little time for break in between. And so it causes so much focus, and later you hear, oh, I have a headache. I don't know where it came from. Oh, I know. So it just requires a lot of patience and a lot of endurance. And I think that people are finally able to see a lot of the nuances about where people come from, with different, with the backgrounds provided. There's just a lot of opportunity and room to grow with this digital platform. So even though it's cool to learn some of the tools about how these platforms can help your business or help you be able to reach out for, in my case, some sort of a client or whatever, but it also gives you an opportunity to learn and then grow within your humanity about, just how to treat other people. So I think there's lots of opportunities there, no matter who you are, what color you are, it doesn't matter.
I love that. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
So let's take a few questions. So we had someone come ask, within the interviewing process, how have you experienced being someone who is visibly LGBTQ identifying? So you all can just jump in, or I can select someone.
I can jump in real quick. Great. Because when I apply for a job, my resume has my pronouns on it, and my resume is super queer. So there's really, I show up and from paperwork as openly queer, non-binary, trans-masc individual, and how to navigate that. listen, if you're not okay with me putting my pronouns or my queer experience on my resume, then this isn't the right fit. And that can be really scary. I don't want to sugarcoat it and say you should be you all the time, and it's going to be so affirming. No, it's really scary. And those jobs where I don't hear anything back, I question myself. Should I not have put my pronouns there? Should I have kind of de-queered my resume a little bit? And that's a reality that I grapple with every day. And somebody else asked about the Supreme Court case, and there's a major difference between legal equality and lived equity. And somebody can say, I'm not denying you this job, or I'm not interviewing because you're LGBTQ. It's because I don't think you're the right fit for our community culture at this workplace. And so there's still elements of discrimination that can happen that I know that the Supreme Court case, it's a great win, it's huge. And it's not getting rid of discrimination against LGBTQ folks in the workplace. It's just not. There's a lot more work and time needed to get to that place of lived equity.
Yeah, definitely. Did anyone else have anything to add to that? So with that, let's talk a little bit about, we had a really great question about at what stage in the interview process. So you've done your research, you're starting that interview process. At what stage do folks on this panel feel comfortable asking about D&I, or DE&I, and benefits and things like that? So I can share from my perspective. I recently switched jobs, and it wasn't from that first interview. It was after I felt like I was really, I was in that second and third interview. I actually asked, do they have an employee resource group? And we had a few questions about that as well. Do you have an employee resource group? Do you have a diversity, equity, and inclusion head? And then nearer to the end of the interview, I actually asked if I could speak with the chair of the LGBTQ employee resource group. So at that point, I felt like they knew me really well, and I wanted to know a little bit more about them. So did any of the other panelists have anything even to jump in on that, about their experience interviewing?
I did a phone interview, and then I had an in-person interview. And I felt most comfortable when I was with the head of the program department, who was a person of color and who was pushing and was very honest and transparent about the stage of where the foundation was at when it came to DEI work. But it was a point of question where I was like, I need to address this in order for me to come here. And what are the sort of protocols in place that you have, even if it's only in the program department for now, but that, like what is like the strategy here? How are we going to make sure that that in the coming years the foundation is enters a path of DEI, and we've seen it happen. I mean, I've been at the foundation for 2.5 years, and in the last 2 years we went from talking about DEI to racial equity, and that is huge for an 100-year-old white dominant institution. And we just started earlier this year a process with Interaction Institute for Social Change to do an internal equity process. I'm optimistic. I'm cautiously optimistic about this, and so. But it's been a tremendous growth within 2 years, and literally we just had a staff meeting last month, a couple of weeks ago, and we had our the first time that we've had affinity spaces, one for our white colleagues and then one for people of color. So we're on that track. That's
phenomenal. I did want to ask one other. Oh, Karon, please.
Yeah, can I jump in here too? So it strikes me too that it's a possibility to think in terms of using these questions as a way to interview the organization about itself by using terms that are important to organizations. So something that sounds a little bit more like, I know for most organizations, having strong levels of engagement from people where people know that they can contribute all of who they are at work is an important value. Tell me how it is that you all deliver on that here. So it becomes, I think, a journey to understand how much of yourself you want to put into that question against the nexus of how far you are in the interview process. So my point here is that we have choices, and often we can perhaps layer in more about what we expect from organizations and speak to what hiring managers are looking for.
Yeah, and do so in a way of acknowledging what you've already learned, right? So that point in the interview where they say, "Do you have any questions for me?" You can say, "Well, it's clear to me by your mission statement that you X, Y, Z. I see you you've made a logo that's rainbow." I mean, that's the end, beginning and end.
Tell me about that. Yeah.
Yeah, tell me about who worked on that and where that came from, and was that driven by your employee resource group, and kind of just supporting them through feeling more open, so that you can find out what's really, behind it. Yeah. So we have 1 minute left, and there was a question. It's the first question that came in, and I'm hoping we can just address it really quick, which is the idea of pronouns in email signatures. So this person says, with the Supreme Court decision, now of course, everything's solved. We can't be fired for our LGBTQ plus identities. And in this particular person's organization, there has been a initiative, verbal, with some pressure, to put pronouns in the signature. And there has been no exceptions for people in the LGBTQ plus community who may not feel comfortable doing so. What advice do any of our panelists have for helping to navigate the pronoun in the which is basic? It seems sometimes like rainbow washing the logo, like it's a signal, but how have you navigated that, if at all, or what advice do you have for this this person that asked this question?
I will say, a lot of thoughts that cannot be summarized easily. But I think just sometimes employers do these things, they take these actions like, well, look how awesome we are. And they don't really think through the long-term implications of what this actually feels like as an LGBTQ plus person. So I think having the ability to tell your story and say, listen, this is why this is not okay for me, or why this is problematic. And, understanding that a one-size-fits-all, statement or, whatever it may be is not the right way to go about this. And conversation, understanding, empathy, all of that needs to really be at the cornerstone of policy, internal policy. So I think that there's a lot to be said about pronouns, about these types of procedures and databases, and also all these mechanisms that signal heteronormativity in our businesses and in our workplaces. There's a lot of ways that we need to address that, and it cannot be a one-size-fits-all answer.
I love that. I think that's a really great place to leave. And I know the Chamber has committed to taking some of these answers off the air and providing some resources. Folks asked, a hiring manager asked for resources on where to look for LGBTQ employees, and that's such a great question. So without that, I know we're at time. I just wanted to thank the panelists so much, and thank the Chamber for letting me be here today. I think there were so many great gems in this, and if anything, it's just great to see everyone's faces. Yes. I'll pass it over to you, Carly.
Yeah, thank you, Tori. Thank you so much for moderating, and thank you to the whole panel, to everybody watching the webinar too. Like Tori said, we had a bunch of great questions come in at the end, and I'll be circulating answers to all participants here after the webinar. We'll also be uploading this to YouTube if you're looking for more of the technical skills. Earlier in Job Week, we just uploaded our resume and cover letter workshop, and we'll be uploading our interview tips webinar later today. So you'll be able to see the full set of everything up online. It'll all be captioned and accessible. If you have any questions about it, feel free to reach out to me. My email is carly.davis@malgbtcc.org. We also have info@malgbtcc.org. And yeah, thank you all so much for joining, and you'll get an email from me soon with all of these answers and tons of resources and anything you could ever want. But follow up with anything else. Thanks, and have a lovely, lovely day.